Hi there, my name is Eileen Morgan, and this is
Esther Vandecar.
And Esther is the founder of Fushicho Daiko Dojo here in Phoenix, Arizona, and we're going to have a little talk.
Good. I know how to do that.
Why did you decide to leave the country? Because this was like mid-80s, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So,
Well, I had just graduated from not Kalamazoo. That was in California. I went to college, and I had just graduated with a master's in something other than business. And they offered a job to the university teaching English in Japan. And I was so excited because I had had a lot of contact with Japan, being the daughter and secretary for a big motorcycle shop. And so I was fascinated, and I wanted to go and find out what it was all about. Well, the head of that department, the business department, said, no, this is not a business issue, so you can't do that. You know, you had to be in some other department. So I went back and told my I don't know whether he was my teacher or anyway, that how disappointed I was. And he said, well, get over it because you're going and I'll make it happen. And I mean, he raised all kinds of hell, and I got to go to Japan to teach English. And it was just a huge thing, you know, to do. I'd been in East Lansing for most of my life and hardly traveled anywhere except Florida because it was warm there. My family always went to Florida. And it just changed my life totally. I studied Japanese before I went at a school in San Francisco, but I learned hello, how are you, and my name is, and all that stuff. The rest of it had to come the hard way. And anyway, that's how I got there in the first place. And while I was teaching English, the secretary, one of the secretaries in our school, she was friendly to me. I mean, she was attracted to me in some of my personality or something. And she said, Esther, do you know how to sing? And I said, oh, I love to sing. She said, would you like to join a chorus? And I said, oh God, I'd love that. But I don't speak Japanese. And she said, we sing in Latin. They were a classical music singing group, and they were like, I think they had number one on our island, and number 3 or something in all of Japan. They were so good. And I was just so honored and terrified. And but they were welcoming, and I just had such a wonderful time. Well, occasionally we would, you know, go out for dinner or something together, and they said, Esther, there's a Taiko group coming to town. We think you'd probably really like to see that. I said, what's Taiko? I'd never heard of it before. So anyway, they took me, and because there were 34 of us, there was no room for us to all sit together. So I sat all by myself, but it was music, so I wasn't worried that I would miss out on anything. Well, they closed the curtains and turned down the lights, and all of a sudden my heart jumped right out of there was this boom, boom going on, and I was terrorized. I thought, my God, they've got another bomb on this place. Well, the curtains opened about 40 seconds later, and here's, I don't know, I think there were 10 or 15 naked men. And it was just almost terrorizing because that's a lot of naked men. Well, as the lights came up a little bit, I noticed that they weren't actually naked, they were wearing diapers. And that just almost cracked me up. It was good that I wasn't sitting next to my choir people because they would have been so embarrassed. And so I just sat there stunned through the entire performance. I was like with my mouth hanging open. I couldn't believe what I was seeing and hearing. And I mean, you heard it with your body too. I mean, I just boom, boom, boom. It was absolutely different than anything I'd ever seen in my life. And so I went running down the stairs. We were all meeting out in front of the theater. And I said, that's it. That's what I want to do. And there, 30 faces just fell. And they said, Esther, you can't do that. It's for men only, and only Japanese men can do that. Well, the men only pissed me off because I'm an American woman, right? But the Japanese part, there wasn't a thing I could do about. And I mean, it was a very Japanese art form. I don't think there were taiko groups. I mean, there were lots of drumming kind of things all over the world. Different nationalities had, I mean, everybody loves drums, but not taiko. This was where it began. And so there were no women then. And so I just had to be their fan. I went to Sado Island every summer that I could, and they had, some of those men had wives, and some of them sang or played a flute. But as the years passed, I mean, 3 years later, they started training women because the women insisted. And that opened the door. So they started having classes. So I studied with Kodo before I studied with anybody else. And, but I mean, we're talking, 6 days of classes or something once a year. So I didn't come home a taiko player. I came home a taiko lover, and I was not giving up on this. So I started looking around, and I'm trying to remember who the first group was that nobody really wanted to welcome me because I was a foreigner and a woman, but there were a couple of groups that had women. So they were accommodating because they needed to be nice to foreigners. I lived in Matsuyama, Japan, which was open to college students from all over the world came there, and the city actually had an office that was just for foreigners. If you had a problem, if you needed to find out where to find some kind of food or clothing or something, there was a place for you to go. And so I went there and said, I want to play taiko. And they're going, well, that's really not, we don't have any women in our taiko groups. And I said, you're kidding. And it happened, it was the city that had these taiko groups. And so I just kept annoying them. Month after month, I'm going down to that office to see if they weren't opening a class for foreigners. Well, I also included a couple of people. I said, wouldn't you like to try this? And they're going, they didn't know because they hadn't seen it. And so one day they said, one of the teachers has said he would welcome you to come and try, So I started with, what's our teacher's name?
Miyagawa, yeah?
No.
Miyagawa-san?
No.
Tauchi.
Tauchi-san.
Oh, okay.
Yes. And, I mean, he just adopted me. And even though I was kind of a pest, because I didn't have a clue. And I still didn't speak Japanese very well. I could do, I'd like soup and salad or that sort of thing. Or I lived up here, I could say those ordinary things in Japanese, but to take instructions for something as unique as that, it was really hard for me. But eventually they invited me to join one of the groups because I was getting it, and because I was willing to be fierce and, hit hard and raise my arm all the way up, which was kind of hard for Japanese women. So there were very few Japanese women playing at all. And so that was the beginning of my career. And I then moved on to Mr. Miyagawa. He started a group of his own, and I don't even remember. I played for a couple of other groups too, but I was a taiko player from that moment on to forever. Even now, old and gray, I'm still banging on those big drums.
So, do you remember that first time? So the first time you played was actually on Sado with the Kodo classes?
Yeah.
It was the first time you actually got to hit a drum?
Yes.
So what was that experience like for you, that first time you got to do that?
It was just awesome, and unfortunately, I realized once they let me hit the drum that I didn't know whether I could do this or not. I mean, you had to have power, and women are not encouraged to have power, even in the United States. And so that took, I did it eventually. I thought, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it right. And so eventually the fear of showing that I had power was overcome. And it benefited me greatly as a possible taiko player, because I could hit that drum really hard and correctly, because they really were good teachers. So by the time I left there, even after my first summer with them, I lost my fear of the Japanese race. They were, if I played these drums well, they would have to accept me, and they did. It worked. Yeah. So then I met Tochi-san, and I don't even remember. I don't think he had a class. It's been so long, I can't remember exactly how I got in there, but they invited me to join one of the minor groups, and so I got to practice and learn the songs of Matsuyama, which are still my favorites. So, and I still go back there and get to work with Mr. Now I go out to lunch with Mr. Tauchi with you. So he's just thrilled to be able to take us out. Yeah, it's such a treat. And of course, my career there included many other teams that I was able to play with over the remaining years that I lived there. So, and I still get to go back and visit with them. So that was, I was gifted, because even the other women in Matsuyama said, women don't play taiko. But they did after I started. The field opened up. So there are many women playing taiko in Matsuyama.
Right, so you think it was, that they could see that you were doing this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and if Mr. Miyagawa was going to teach me, he couldn't refuse to teach them.
True. So your first performance, was it with Mr. Tauchi's group, or did you do a little performance on Sado with the classes that you took?
I don't think we ever performed.
Yeah.
We would play what we had learned for
Right.
the teachers that we had, but yeah, I don't think they ever let us perform. I don't remember that anyway.
Yeah. And that was the era, on Sado, that was the era of Yoshikazu-san and Eiichi Saito and Chieko and...
Yes, all
Right.
the heavies.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they were almost every one of them was a wonderful teacher too, and they were respectful to me, even though I was a foreigner and I spoke Japanese by then, but I wasn't very good at it. And but I think just my enthusiasm and my respect for them and the art form was my path. Because they were always very respectful, and enthusiastic after a while, after they had known me for a while, about teaching me. So that was an honor for me.
That's a wonderful experience.
Yeah.
And then when you were with Mr. Tauchi's group, did you have performances to the public?
Oh yeah.
So do you remember your first performance? What some of those what was going through your mind the first time that you had to perform in public?
No, because I was such a wreck. I was so afraid that I was going to, Taiko is, especially in some groups in Japan, and in those days, it was much more formal. And so if you didn't get, the stance right, or if you weren't hanging onto your bachi correctly, people noticed that, even people that didn't play Taiko. They would have known that I was, an amateur that shouldn't be up there. And so the pressure was really tremendous on me. And Mr. Tauchi was not, he guided me steadily and firmly, but he was never judgmental of me. He loved my enthusiasm and my willingness to put myself out there. Because everybody was out in the audience waiting to critique me. And they wouldn't have been nervous about saying, they wouldn't have done that, of course, but you can tell attitude in your face. And so the pressure was tremendous on me. But I was younger and stronger then too. I don't know whether I could do it now, but I just would not give up.
Right, because you were in your mid-40s, right?
Yeah, I was not young. In their terms, a 40-year-old woman was old.
Right.
Basically.
But that time in a woman's life is also, you've raised your children, and
yep.
You get to the point where, what changes between being a 20-year-old woman and being a 45-year-old woman?
Lots.
Yeah.
But going through that in Japan rather than in the United States was total different experience. So, and it was kind of an advantage to being a foreigner, simply because, especially in Matsuyama, they were most of their foreign influence was, they were dedicated to one of the South American countries. I think they had some kind of a sister city relationship with them, and so they welcomed that group of people to the universities. They had 3 or 4 universities there, a couple that I eventually taught English in, and so that office that I told you I went to when I wanted to learn Taiko, because they were there to help foreigners. Well, the foreigners basically were this South American population, and there weren't all that many Americans there at that time. But I used them constantly because they made some of the things that would have been difficult for me to accomplish by myself. They opened doors for me that made it possible for me to grow in that way. And there weren't too many of those people from South America that were interested in learning Taiko. They wanted other things, but so I was basically it. Not too many women particularly were interested in playing Taiko. I never understood why, but eventually now they have several really good female Taiko groups, so things have changed a lot since I first arrived on their shores.
So you played with Mr. Tauchi, and then you worked and studied and played with Miyagawa-san.
Yep.
Right?
Yes.
When was it that you went to Hiroshima? I can't remember whether I wanted that experience or not, but I looked for a job, and somebody in Matsuyama helped me to find the source of jobs there for English teachers. And
Oh no, I remember my school opened a school in Hiroshima, and so I went there to with a secretary to open this new school in Hiroshima, and I don't think I knew anything about. I mean, of course, I knew there was a war and with Japan, and that it was a big deal, but I really knew nothing about the history. And so the first 3 weeks of school, when we opened that school, we had, one student a week or so. I mean, it was ridiculous. And I'm a Gemini, I'm a little Energizer bunny, and I just about went nuts. And the secretary said, Esther, you're going to drive me crazy. She said, you can borrow my bicycle, go on a tour of, this is an interesting town. She said, just go right out here in front of the school and turn left and you'll go into this beautiful park. So, okay. So I'm wheeling down the street, and about 3 blocks from me, I had to cross the street, and there was a entrance to the park, but you had to go over or on a bridge to go over the river that went through there. I got to that bridge and just burst into tears. And I had no idea what was happening to me. I was terrorized. I thought, I'm having a nervous breakdown or something, and I'm in a foreign country. And I spoke some Japanese, but I'd only been there, I think, a year. So it was a really scary thing. And of course, several people, one was American, fortunately, because the Japanese people could only, they don't touch you, That's not a thing where an American would probably just have pat me on the back and said, everything's okay, what's wrong with you? and I didn't know what was wrong with me. I hadn't a clue. Mm-hmm. Well, the American person that finally came along, and because even though I spoke Japanese by then, I forgot every bit of it when this emotional thing hit me, and I just was scared to death. I didn't know what was happening to me. And he said, have you ever been to this atomic museum? And the whole park was about the bomb. Mm-hmm. And I said, no. What is this all about? Why am I falling apart? And he said that this place is so full of, the memories of those people who died here and were washed down that river, and the whole city. I mean, it was Americans and Japanese people died in this horrible thing that happened when they dropped that atomic bomb. And it of course changed that whole city. I mean, their focus then had to be on surviving and on coming out of it. I mean, there were people that had all kinds of, even the ones that lived, had all kinds of residual problems with their health. And so they had a big hospital in Hiroshima that is still there, but in the last 10 or 15 years, I mean, there are no residual atomic issues, because all those people that were affected have died in the 100 years since. I don't know how long ago it happened, but anyway, that when the Americans built that hospital, and it's still there, but they don't have those kind of patients anymore. But anyway, that was my introduction to the bomb, and I mean, it just made me so ashamed of my country. How could we do that? Of course, I'd been there long enough so that I had some Japanese friends, and I had learned to love this country, and I just couldn't imagine how we could do that to another country. But I just became involved, so I was invited to join a survivors group. That was probably the biggest surprise to me that they didn't hate me. I mean, as a country, they hated the United States, but they didn't, finger individual Americans. There were a lot of American people living in Hiroshima. There was still a military base there, and a lot of those people, military people, after they left the military, stayed in Hiroshima and trying to do whatever they could, to help. And at some point, this was one of the biggies in my life too. There was a woman that I knew from the school. Maybe she had studied with me. I can't remember exactly how I met her, but she said that she belonged to one of the survivors clubs, and there were many of them. I mean, the families that lost people, and everybody did. Everybody lost somebody, and I mean, that city was absolutely devastated. So they had survivors groups to support the families that were left behind, and it was really interesting because even though they were heartbroken people, their lives had been just ravished, their quest was positive. They were looking for ways to end this hatred of Americans, and I mean, it didn't get you anywhere. And but they were also looking for answers. Why these things happen, and why would anybody use atomic force when it's so devastating? Even if you don't die, which is actually, it's better to die of that, because if you live, you're going to probably die of having been exposed to that. And so their question for me, and I invited another American there that I really liked, I eventually made Japan his home. I don't know if he still lives there, but I know he lived there for at least 20 years that I know, kept in contact with him. And they said, what we'd really like to know is if anybody in the United States ever died from the results of being exposed to this atomic energy. And of course I hadn't a clue, and I had no idea, how was I going to find that out? Well, that young man and I went to every library in Japan, and of course his Japanese was better than mine. I mean, I could speak it, but I couldn't really read anything except restaurant menus. But he eventually made that his home. He teaches at a college in Hiroshima, and so he was studying Japanese, and was into the history. And so anyway, we went and we never, for a long time, we did not find the answer to this, even though we just scoured. I mean, we spent hours every week in various libraries trying to find the answer to this question. And I mean, it was just our way of saying we were so sorry of what our country had done to them. And they treated us respectfully, and of course they wanted to know the answer to this, but they could have been snots, I suppose. Anyway, one day, we were about to give up. I mean, we'd been at this for probably 2 or 3 months, going several times a week, going to the libraries, different libraries, and sometimes we'd take a train, an hour or 2 away, because somebody told us there was a good library. And I don't even remember. I think it was me that found it. And I thought, this can't be the answer to this question. But I was excited because it was something that seemed related to it anyway. A lot of the atomic bomb testing went on in New Mexico because they had a desert. Well, the Native American kids, that was their playground. the desert. And I mean, it was the only one they had. They didn't have parks and, you know, swings and all that stuff. They just went out and ran and rolled in and lived in the sands of that desert. And they were the ones that first died of the atomic bomb residue. I mean, they didn't get bombed, of course, because they were American, but that was, anyway, we were so happy when we found the answer for them, because they were, I don't know I mean, they were all such nice women. It was really hard to say. It seemed like they were looking for some way to feel good that we suffered too, you know, like a vindictive kind of thing, but it wasn't. And I don't know that I truly understood completely what it meant to them, but it was very important for them to find out, you know, what happened. And that young man and I were so proud that we had answered their question. You know, it was just, I don't know why I thought it was so important, but I knew that it was to them, so I was happy that I had that opportunity, even if it was stressful.
Right. Because this was only 45 years after the bombing.
Yeah, I don't know exactly, but I would say.
I mean, yeah, mid-80s when you were there. So
right.
40 years is
not very long.
It's not very long
No.
at all.
No.
Yeah, because now it's 75 years after.
Well, and for many years, the residue of that event just affected their lives in ways that we had no idea of in the United States. And of course, I was still living there when I discovered that when young women and men wanted to get married, I mean, when it came to that time, their families spent a lot of money on private detectives and research to make sure that they were not marrying somebody that had been exposed or to the bomb, or somebody whose parents had been, because it can be some of those diseases that came out of being affected by atomic energy can also be passed on in your genes. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know any of that stuff, until this happened. But you had to pass a test before you could marry your love of your life, because if your family didn't approve in Japan, you didn't get to marry the love of your life. He had to go away. And so those kind of research things were essential even to poor families. They would do it as whatever they could afford, they were willing to pay. So that bomb was just totally changed the Japanese way of life, and it was really hard for me. But as long as I lived there, occasionally I would go to, I often went to the park that was dedicated to that disaster. But on some weekends, there would be a holiday, a Japanese holiday or something, where the families would be camping, or not camping, but having picnics alongside the river. And so I happened to be on my way somewhere, and I really didn't want to go down that path, because that was where all the people were having their picnics. But it was going to take me too long, to go the other way. I had an appointment with somebody. So I went down that path and just tried to ignore the fact that there were families on either side of me that probably were hating me. But that was the shortest way for me to get there. Two of those families along the way invited me to sit down and have a picnic with them. I mean, it was all I could do not to cry. And I didn't really have time. I was supposed to meet somebody. I couldn't say no. I was so grateful that, they had given up the impact that had had on them and their family and their world to invite me to sit down and have a picnic with them. That was one of the high spots in my time there. Second after Taiko, of course. But
How did you get involved with Taiko in Hiroshima?
oh gosh, who did introduce it? I think I met Sumiko somewhere, and I can't remember how I met her, but I told her that I wanted to play Taiko, but that I had asked somebody else maybe in my school or something where I taught, and they said, "Oh, women don't play Taiko," and I said, "I'd heard that one before." And but I told Sumiko about it, and she said, "Well," she said, "we have a couple of Taiko players that are. One was from England, and I think one was from the United States, but there was another one that was from somewhere else. New Zealand, yeah, that was it." And she said, "So I know that, he's open, the teacher is open to that, but," she said, you have to be able to make a lot of sacrifices to be able to be on his team, because you have to be there for every lesson. I mean, you can't say, well, I'm supposed to go to the disco tonight, I'm busy." There's no being busy. You're dedicated to this teacher and his team. And she said, to be perfectly honest, she said the Japanese men that are in it do not like it that he lets foreigners in. And so they're not very helpful to you. They make it clear that it's not their choice, that Munakata sensei is the only one that can make that decision. And she said sometimes if they really like the player or the person who wants to become a player, and that person works hard and learns all the formalities of his dojo, they'll accept you. But to embrace you, don't hold your breath, hon. Well, I didn't care. I mean, I was a redhead, I could get along without them as long as I got to study with him. And I had heard that, I don't think I'd even seen them when I asked her about that. But eventually I got to see them play, and oh my God, I just fell in love with their music. But it was so hard. It was really difficult music. So anyway, I went for a couple of classes, and Munakata sensei tested me without me supposedly knowing it, and but I was on to him. And fortunately, if I hadn't known Sumiko, I probably wouldn't have made it, because she told me all the little secrets of, you had to get down on your knees and bow, and a lot of foreigners wouldn't do that, to get on their knees and bow to somebody Japanese. But he was also an actor. What did he do?
No theater.
No theater, yeah. So he was into all the formalities of the theater and how the respect that it deserved, and we had to have that or we were out.
Oh, he put me through that too in 2001.
Yeah, he's still at it.
Yeah, the whole
Yeah.
forehead
I
on
think
the floor. Yeah.
After I had my knees replaced, and I'm going, but I can't die this, yo. And so somebody, I think probably Sumiko, explained to him that I had my knees replaced, and that it was really hard for me to get on my knees. It hurts because the skin is hitting this hard bone. I don't know why. It's because it didn't hurt me before, but anyway, he made an exception for me, which everybody in there is going, really? he never made an exception for us. But I was grateful, and I was very close to him. So
Mhm. So he kind of put you through the trials.
Oh,
and
yeah.
So obviously you
I
passed.
passed.
Did you
yeah.
have to sign a contract, or was it just an unspoken requirement for rehearsals and?
You know, I don't remember ever signing a paper
Mhm.
contract, but you had to commit to being on time, being there every week, unless you're sick, or, you know, I said I go home once a year, you know, and as long as I wasn't I couldn't miss a performance, you know, that I had to schedule my whole life around being available. So, which held over in my dojo and made me very unpopular because everybody wanted to be in Fushicho Daiko pro group, and I mean, Tony was the only one that ever missed a performance because he was an actor,
Mhm.
and I think he got over that when I told him I think he had to go too if he couldn't always be there for us. Because if you're taking money for performances, you can't say, "Oh, sorry, we only have 2 people this week. There'll be 4 next time." You couldn't get away with that, and so I was not very popular with some of my students, but such is life. And I learned that from him that, you know, we had a reputation of being a big group to begin with. I mean, I don't remember how many there were, but like 20 or something. So if only 7 showed up, that was not what the the promoter paid for, you know. And anyway, I learned a lot of things about running a taiko group from Mikachi Sensei. And a lot of it was not appreciated by the American students, especially. The Japanese students just shrugged their shoulders and, well, I want to be in this group, so I guess I have to suck it up.
Mhm. So your first performance with them, because you'd already been taking taiko, right? You'd already had classes and performances in Matsuyama,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Yeah.
by the time you were in Hiroshima, you had that background, but of course the repertoire was completely different.
Oh, yeah.
So it's the learning curve of
Yeah.
new repertoire. What was the? I want to go back to that, but what were some of the differences to you personally in the repertoire from Hiroshima as opposed to the Matsuyama repertoire? Did you feel that there was a difference?
Oh, yeah. And partly it was because Munakachi Sensei was just the epitome of a Japanese artist that, you know, had all of these, I don't know, what do you call it, just the, the history of that particular art form. You know, you had to follow the protocol. I mean, there were no exceptions. And then the dojo itself had rules. I mean, you had to get on your knees and bow when you came into the dojo, and you were bowing not to him, but to the dojo. And um, even that, I didn't get dispensation for that. I don't know. I think he put a pillow up there so I could kneel on that, but I had to kneel. And I forgot what your question was now.
Well,
difference.
the repertoire.
Oh.
The repertoire, because Hiroshima Hozankai repertoire is historic.
Right, it's very old. So, and he was not ever going to let you. You know, I mean, I teach kachidoki and all that, and 2 years later, one of my students who now has their own group somewhere, they're playing it with their own little lick to it. And I'm just going, how disrespectful. I mean, you just, and I tried to instill that in people that this is why I'm being, tough, because I'm wanting to teach people how to honor that. I mean, that music is what, 200 years old or something? 100 years old?
Yeah, well, I mean, Kachidoki and Shitsujin, the Hatanaka pieces are written from the 70s to the 2000s.
Right, but
But-
Munakata Sensei's stuff is,
It's 400 to 1,000
Right,
years old.
right.
Yeah.
so I had never any intent to violate that and didn't want to allow anybody that I taught. I mean, I made sure that they knew when they were having the honor to learn it, that this was required. They had to understand why. And there occasionally were people that didn't see that I had the right to do that. Well, I mean, I didn't have a piece of paper that said you have the right to do this, but I made that commitment to Munkata Sensei, and I never had any problem in, following it myself or requiring my students to follow it. So some of them left me because they didn't like, they thought I was being a controlling freak, which is not in my nature. But when it came to the Hiroshima Taiko Zonkai music, I was a control freak because it was an honor to be able to play it, and I had vowed, to carry it on, that honor for this music, and passed it to you, who is honoring it,
I hope so.
as far as I've seen so far. But it was a whole new world for me, because I'm American and a woman in the era when women were beginning to have, a voice in the world. It was something I had to come to terms with because, why would he think he could tell me what to do? Well, I learned that in Japan, that, he was teaching me because I had made a commitment to this music and honoring it, and which I did because I wanted to learn it. But I had to come to terms with that personally because I have a set of moral criteria for myself, and I couldn't promise to honor that and then not honor it. I had to, and so I had to also take some of the negativity that the student, of course, those students left me because it wasn't pleasant to be there with me when I knew they were violating them. So, but I'm tough. My hair used to be red under here. So there was no problem with me sticking to my guns.
So, with all these wonderful experiences in Taiko, and we haven't actually gotten into all of them. I know. I wanted to go back to, performing with Hiroshima Taiko Hozonkai. Were the performances with that group different than with the Matsuyama groups because the Hiroshima songs are so much older and so much more, I don't want to say respected, that's not really quite the right word, but did you have performances that were for different purposes in Hiroshima? Or was it store openings and festivals?
No, there were a lot more. We did some, on the street kind of festivals and stuff, but there were all kinds of, I don't even remember necessarily what the events were, but they were, honoring some army or something. I mean, we did a lot of performances that honored those kind of activities, for defending your country and of course we did entertainment kind of performances too, but even then, Murakata Sensei had a great deal of respect from a city the size of Hiroshima. He was known by everybody and highly respected. So nobody messed with his requirements. So I don't know about now. because he now teaches no dance. He told Sumiko that he was too old to do something that didn't give him joy too. So he was turning the dojo, the Taiko dojo, over to the top students that he had, and he was going to go to, what's the name of the island? Miyajima, yes, where they have a big no community. And so he went out there and became the prime dancer, I think. I think he was like their go-to person. And I mean, he's the kind of person that if he was into your art form or your whatever it was that you believed in, he would be a stellar member. So he's just a wonderful human being.
With the other members of the group that were foreigners, when you performed, did you feel the same amount of like pressure because there were other foreigners in there when it was time to perform?
I don't know. I think I became more judgmental than I had ever been in my life because I was seeing it through his eyes. You know, I had been a part of that was not living up to the expectations because I hadn't had enough experience and I didn't really understand, I think, how important all that, even coming into the dojo, you know, getting on your knees to say, hello. I mean, eventually they gave me special dispensation after I had my knees replaced because, you know, we're talking about a hardwood floor. It hurt. And, but yeah, what was the question again?
Well, just in performance, because you'd mentioned when you were performing for Matsuyama that you felt like people were looking specifically at you because you were the foreigner. Like you were the one token foreigner. But in Hiroshima, there was David, right, from England.
Right. They had
New Zealand.
And there was a woman that left just before I came, and I had seen her perform too. I think she was American, but yeah, there were several foreigners. He still had the same demands, you know, but he was open to having foreigners, and which I thought was really interesting because he was such a traditional man, you know, being a priest, and that was interesting for me that he was able to handle both of those kind of respectability issues. So, but he's an amazing man. So,
yeah, he really is. So, what are some Taiko lessons / life lessons? What are some things about Taiko that ended up influencing your life?
Well, I think the biggest thing was the importance of teamwork and respect, because I was one of those human beings that from childhood, I mean, I had a mind of my own. I knew what I wanted to do, and of course, I've always wanted to do something that was terrifying my parents. And you know, so to follow somebody, I mean, I knew that actually following his rules was inconvenient for me, but I never argued it. He commanded that kind of respect without opening his mouth. I mean, you just met him and you knew that he was the man. I mean, the buck stopped here. And he was warm, and I remember he invited us often to go out with him after class because he hadn't had dinner yet, and so we'd go and have some soup or something, okonomiyaki or something like that, after class. And so he was an icon, but he was so human, and if you treated him with respect, I mean, you got respect back. He treated you with respect. And of course, he didn't have students that didn't. I mean, I don't know who pushed him out, whether it was the senior members or if it was him, because he never overtly ever told anybody to go. But I mean, people without respect for the art form and him were out. I mean, it was just, there was no big to do about it. It was just, you were trained from first lesson, that you got on your knees and you bowed to the dojo. I mean, you were not bowing to him as a man, but but he was the king of the dojo. So, I mean, he had so much respect from, I never saw anybody that was really disrespectful to him. I just saw a couple of people who tried to step over some of his requirements, and it just didn't work. So even the rest of the students, he never had to say a word to them. The rest of the students would just, if you can't follow the rules, don't come back. So, yeah, it was interesting, because there was never any argument about any of this. And maybe it's because most of those people were Japanese, even that didn't want to follow the rules. They understood the concept, and so they just had to go find some other drum to bang on. So, and playing his music was a whole lot harder than playing any other kind of taiko that I ever learned in Japan.
Why?
Well, it was complex music, for one thing, and sophisticated is all I can think of. But the people that wrote it were not, highly educated or any of that. I mean, it had nothing to do with that. It was a respect issue from, I don't know where, from here, I guess. And but it was easy once it was difficult for me in the beginning. I was always breaking the rules because I didn't know them. I didn't understand them. But I never argued, because nobody was ever mad at me. They were just like, Dame, you can't do that, And and why? Because it was a matter of respect. Whether it was to Munakata sensei or the drums themselves, I mean, you had to treat the drums as if they were, precious babies. And even playing, when we went out and played in public, everything was done with this great respect for the drums and the music and the sensei and even each other. It was really a nice atmosphere to be in. And of course, there's always got to be one. And there was one guy that was, he was never disrespectful to sensei, but like he was always trying to put the make on me. And I wasn't the first one, but I didn't observe the others, I guess, before me. It was just like, I needed a club to to keep him off, until sensei caught him one day, and that was the end. He was either out. I can't remember. I think eventually he did leave, but it wasn't right away. But that just was not acceptable. And of course, sensei didn't care whether you had an affair with somebody in the class, but was not going to be coerced. So that was kind of interesting. And he really loved me, which was, of course, I didn't realize that for a long time, but when maybe it was after I came home. I mean, I know he always liked me and was really kind and helped me to try to be the best I could be. But when I would come back to visit, um, and I would go and play with them, and uh, of course we always went out afterwards for okonomiyaki or soba or something, and I mean he was just so happy to see me and to go out for noodles, and I was so honored. You know, that was great.
Yeah, hearing you talk about your time with Hiroshima Taiko Zonkai helps me realize how much of that protocol and unspoken expectations you carried over into this dojo,
Yeah.
into Fushicho Daiko Dojo.
I tried. I never lived up to his standards, but I learned a lot from him.
Mhm.
Yeah. And if I started another dojo now, it would have to be the same kind of expectation. I mean, respect is the biggest for not just for me, but for the art form, for the dojo, I mean, you do it too. It's very important.
Mhm.
You can't have one errant student ruining the whole night for a class, for example. They just have to all understand that this is really important to have this kind of respect for each other and the art form, to make things the best they can be for all of us. Yeah, not easy, but worth it.
Mhm.
And I see that in your dojo. They all seem to have a great deal of respect for you. And there's a few of them I see that have red hair personalities. But they're still making the best efforts they can,
Mhm.
to be respectful.
Mhm.
So and it makes the dojo so much easier to run, and it becomes a pleasure also for you. I mean, the sensei should be enjoying this experience too.
Mhm.
I often wondered if that was one of the reasons that Munakata sensei, you know, gave over to his seniors um, the teaching of Hiroshima Taiko Zonkai. But Simko said no. It was because he wanted so badly to go back and, do the no dancing and just that he had not had time for in so many years. So um, I was happy that he was enjoying it because she said he was just loving doing it. And he danced for us once when I was there. Did he ever do that when you were there?
I mean, we did go to we went to Miyajima years ago with him. And he gave us the behind the scenes tour, which was amazing.
Yeah.
And I've seen snippets and bits and pieces there, but not anything formal.
Yeah. Well, yeah, this was not formal. I think he just, I know he was teaching somebody that couldn't come on his regular class night, and he wasn't very flexible, when it came to um, commitments and, class times and stuff. But that person apparently had, some good attributes that he admired. So he was teaching her when our class was going to begin. He was still teaching her. So we got to watch them, doing that no dance. And it was just really interesting. And you could just see that he was so happy, to be doing it. So I am happy for him that he's getting to.
So some of your other taiko experiences we haven't touched on was Nomura, going to Nomura. So this was back, I think, when you were still living in Matsuyama, right?
Yes.
And then you would go to Nomura and take the bus, or
yes, the bus.
Because this is a little town up in the hinterlands,
right.
Up in the hills.
Well, I actually went there to teach English. And while I was there, I got to watch the women's group play Taiko, and I was just awed. And of course, being a Taiko player, I wanted to do it. And so I asked them if they would teach me. And the men's group said to the women's group, "You cannot teach her. She's a foreigner." And and of course,
You've heard that before.
I'd heard that before, and I could have been a snot, but my job really was to teach English. So then I had a fairly large group at the time, although it dwindled off after I started playing Taiko. But it was just it was such a charming little town. I really liked it, and so I shut my mouth about the Taiko for a couple of weeks, a couple of lessons, and I couldn't. I'm watching them twirling away, and I just thought, I have to do that. And so the woman that I stayed with, I can't remember now her name. She said, "Let me talk to them," because she said, "I think it's the men that are saying that they can't teach you." And so she did. She talked to the woman that was the head of the Silk Daiko, and she said, "Yeah, they don't want us to teach her." And Tamaki, that's her name. She said, "So what?" Well, that's not common for Japanese women to say "so what," but I'm told that what's the name of the lady that is the leader of the Silk Daiko?
Yeah, my brain's going.
Well, that's all right.
Yeah.
Anyway, the leader of the Silk Daiko group that played the females that played Taiko, she heard that, "So what?" And of course, she didn't say "so what" in English, whatever it is in Japanese. I don't even know, because they would never teach me that. But anyway, she said, "Well, she said, I guess it wouldn't hurt." And so the more the men's group complained, the sooner she decided she was, by God, going to teach me how to play Silk Daiko. And so it was on them. It was their fault. They shouldn't have been so snobby. But, that's not uncommon in any country.
So while you were there, you just learned silk.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So otoizumo was never taught to you.
No.
Because I remember that was my assignment I gave myself when I was on maternity leave with child number 2. And you had said to me, "Let's do this," and you had the recording of the men playing otoizumo that I transcribed it, and we figured it out, and so now we play otoizumo. We play the men's version, and I remember
they did not teach us.
I remember very clearly going back to Nomura with you in whatever it was, 2007 or something. And it was the first time I think you'd been back in quite a while.
Yeah.
And we played silk, they played silk, we all played silk together, and the men were there, and then we said, "We'd like to play otoizumo," and so we went up. It was you and me and Ken and Marcia, and I went to the Odaiko to play the Odaiko as a woman.
And they're just cringing, I'm sure.
Yeah, the men are going, "Oh?"
They're what?
Yeah, but it was very interesting, because when we went back a couple years ago, the men were playing silk and the women were playing otoizumo.
Yeah.
They mixed it up a little bit.
Somebody told me that that they were really uptight, and when we first did that, but that the women apparently told them, "Just get over yourself," and which is not common in Japan. But they're Taiko players, and besides that, there are lots of groups now in the United States, and all over the world, including Japan, that are men and women playing together. And so they started learning. I remember they played for us. I think you were there.
Mhm.
The men played silk.
Mhm.
So we created an opportunity for their growth.
And isn't that wonderful how art and culture and humanity works?
Uh-huh.
That we bounce ideas off of each other and it morphs and it changes and right? That's art. It never stays stagnant.
I know it. Well, and the interesting thing for me is that because that was a cultural thing that was, I mean, it was a strong part of their culture. I mean, men and women had different opportunities and expectations, and so that was really breaking some some strong stuff. And I don't think I ever set out to do that. It just, but when it affected me directly, it was really hard, for me. And although I don't think I ever would have learned silk if it hadn't have been for my two friends that went, and neither one of them played taiko, but they were the ones that finally insisted that the women be allowed to teach us silk. Otherwise, I may have never learned it.
Mhm.
So I'm very grateful to them. And not the last time I was there with you guys, but maybe the time before, they played. And I was so, I can't even remember now what I was going to tell you. But anyway, there was, I know, they were on the side of the road, and we had just played and were coming through on a big truck or something, waving at everybody. And there they are, my two. I mean, I used to stay at their homes with their families, and but I couldn't get off. We were on our way to perform somewhere, and I have never had the chance to talk to them again since uh, we were allowed to play the men's
Mhm.
group, and I just wanted to tell them thank you for. I mean, I'm sure they were not popular when they were trying to help us to get that to happen, but for the most part, I mean, everybody there, including the men's taiko players, were very polite to me, and it just was, not a part of their expectations in life, nor had it ever been in that little town. So I was disrupting their calm control unintentionally. I mean, I didn't, because the women were happy to teach me. So anyway, it's one of my favorite memories and favorite places.
Mhm.
I couldn't go to Japan and not go to Nomura. So, and then one year, I think I told you this, that what's his name, the famous sumo wrestler from Hawaii, Akibono-san,
Akibono.
yes, was staying there, and of course, none of them really spoke English. A little, but I'm sure he spoke no Japanese. Anyway, I was staying in a hotel. I couldn't stay with my friends for a couple of years because their kids were growing up and blah blah blah. So anyway, they would put me in this little hotel, and I could walk to the place. What did they call that? Where they had their performance, the sumo wrestling place.
Right.
And but we would perform taiko there,
Mhm.
and so every day I had to walk over there, and I think the second day that I did that, he came out about this, and of course he spoke English
Mhm.
as well as me, and so we every day walked up to the sumo, whatever that big. I mean, they had a big building that was
Mhm.
just for sumo, and it was just so interesting. He was a sweetheart, and so at the end of the festival, they said that he had agreed to, if anybody wanted to have their picture taken with him. I think several people had asked him, and he said, sure, but the people who were in charge didn't want you bothering him, so they said, leave him alone. And so he finally told them, he said, it's okay. If they want to have their picture taken with me, I'm fine with that. So I went they had a photographer, a regular photographic studio there, and he just was there for a whole day. And if you wanted to have your picture taken with him, you could go stand in line. Well, I didn't have to stand in line, but I had my picture taken with him. I found it the other day accidentally, and he was just the sweetest man, and big Hulk, but he was really sweet. And seeing him wrestle with the little kids was hysterical. And he really enjoyed that too. He just thought that was, you wouldn't do that probably in the United States. Maybe now, I don't know. But anyway, he was a sweetheart. I don't know if he's still wrestling or not, but that was a long time ago, so maybe not.
Excuse me. And yeah, it's one of my favorite places is Nomura. And
me too.
And every place that I return to when I go to Japan, if I'm with you or if I'm not with you, going to these dojos that you are a part of are just always so welcoming to me and to my students. So
yeah,
you did a great job of creating a bridge.
yeah, and I'm so happy I did.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah, and you've done a good job with taking everything you learned from me and doing it beautifully.
Thank
you. Yeah. Which isn't always easy. It wasn't easy for me to bring it. It's, to hold to a tradition like that is difficult, because I can't tell you how. You could see people in the audience sometimes when we were performing out in public, and especially the men, they're back there. Making sure that if you make a mistake, man, that's what goes out to all the world is, yeah, well, they screwed that up, so it was very important not to screw up. Because then what could they say? Oh, yeah, not bad. They couldn't badmouth you. So, I got a lot of that because I was a foreigner. We played sometimes in the streets in Matsuyama and Hiroshima a couple of times. So, anyway, it was, I just never let it get to me. If they wanted to be judgmental, that was okay. I was having the time of my life, and I knew it was going to be a life changer for me, having learned to play taiko there. I had no idea how that was going to manifest, but it was dynamite for sure.
Yeah, so how did taiko change your life?
Oh my God, just like 360 degrees. I was, I don't know, probably going to take over my dad's motorcycle shop or something like that. I have no idea, but it certainly has been a wonderful life being a taiko master and teacher and player. Playing is actually still the most joy for me. I like to teach, but if I couldn't play, and I don't get to play very often anymore, that's why I was so terrified here to be videoed, because some of these songs I haven't played in a long time. So,
I know, but they came back.
for the most part, yeah.
You've known them over 40 years,
Yeah.
And even if you haven't played them in 3 or 4 or 5 years, you spent the previous 35 years playing them and teaching them.
So they're somewhere in here, deep.
They're everywhere.
Yeah.
So I was never concerned that it wasn't going to come back.
I was concerned enough for both of us. So good that you didn't stress. And I was also very happy and proud that I mostly got it. And of course, after a while you learn that most of the audience does not know these songs. So if you make one mistake, if the only way they're going to know is if you're up there going, oh no. So you just have to keep smiling even if you made a mistake, and maybe you'll get away with it, unless Eileen's watching.
So what pearls of wisdom do you have for students that are in the process now, or maybe just starting, or have already been playing for a while? What are some of your life lessons you want to give to them for Taiko?
Well, I think there are lots of, advices I could give, but one of the most important is to have respect for the art form and your teacher, because I really think that if you fall in love with the art form, it's so much easier to be respectful, because you want other people. You don't want to play with people who are not playing respectfully. And respect doesn't always equal talent. You have too had lots of students that really had no talent. But if they had enthusiasm and they were willing to work hard, even they could learn to play, a few tunes well. And that gives you such a sense of, it's just, I don't know about other people, but, to master a tune and be able to perform it for the public is just, I'm getting goosebumps just talking about it. It's just so fulfilling and satisfying and I'm sure that's true of a lot of art forms, that that's your joy is. And of course, I play most of the time for my own joy, but it is important. It shows me when I come here, and am playing with your students that, I still need to be a member of the team. I need to, and I think that's maybe the hardest lesson for most students. It's not even so much the notes as it is how important teamwork is to this art form. And maybe that's true with the symphony orchestra too. But although they all seem so isolated in their own little, they're either on strings or horns or whatever. But having never been in an orchestra, I don't know. But being a part of a taiko team is, you have to be a team player, or you're not going to ever be enhancing your group. You might even be a detriment to them, even if you're good. I've had a couple of students that were really excellent players, but they didn't give a shit about, about, you have to edit that part, but about, your team. If you're not a team member, to me, that's a big, even if you're a good musician, you're not really going to be advantageous to a taiko group, because teamwork is what's important. And that way, if somebody has a blank moment or something, if they trust their team and their leader is not going to kill them when they get off the stage, you can just be grateful that you are part of this team, because they covered your butt, and of course you don't want to do that again, but it's really important to have that kind of trust in your team. And I don't think I ever appreciated it when I lived in Japan until I got here and found out how hard that was, because Americans are so independent, and I know this tune, I can do this, it's you have to care about being part of this team, not I got it. That's my opinion anyway. So, And I see that kind of, I mean, of course, I don't know, most of your teams I don't know very well, but there's a few of them that I've watched, and I can't even remember which ones, but I see that in them, that teamwork skill, and it's more important than musical skill, as far as I'm concerned, in something like Taiko. It's just, yeah, it's essential. So they're learning well.
Any last pearls of wisdom?
Oh, all I ever really want, because, you know, I can teach Taiko all day long, and I'm sure you found this too. And some people get it, some people don't. Some people get it, but it doesn't fill their hearts, you know. When I see people playing and just loving what they're doing, even if their stance is a little wrong or they make a mistake, if they're in the spirit of it and you can just see that they're loving it, that's, I mean, I like perfection, but it's not number one for me. It's just being able to not just enjoy the music, but being a part of a team is such a blessing. You learn so many things about life. I mean, it helps you in your family, knowing how to have that kind of, I mean, because the family is a team too.
Mhm.
So I guess I think Taiko is just a really good way to learn how to make it in the world when you have to deal with other people. You know, if your goals are and you don't all have to be exactly the same talented, but if you're really a member of that team and care about, you know, being with them, you'll look great to the audience. Yeah. So, but being able to, you know, do something that you love is just, I mean, I don't know why my hair went gray, because I was so happy playing Taiko all those years. I guess you get old whether you like it or not. And I didn't notice it when it was happening, so it's okay.
Well, thank you so very much
You're welcome.
for everything.
Yeah. You were a great student, girl. I'm so proud of you. And you've just made a wonderful new home for Taiko in this. So I'm
Yeah, I had to laugh when your friend said, let's take you to Taiko, and you said, what's Taiko? Because when my supervisor at work said, this lady wants to teach her students Taiko, and I said, what's Taiko? And I was a music major.
Right.
It's like, but I mean, in the 80s when I was in college, the focus was on old dead white men music,
right.
Bach and Beethoven.
Exactly.
We did jazz, but I don't remember.
Were there any Taiko groups then? Maybe.
Well, it was in the mid 80s, so I mean, there was San Francisco and there was Daiko, but there was not in Rochester. There was no Taiko
Right.
groups.
Yeah, there were a couple of groups.
But I don't even remember learning about any ethnic music. Like, oh, here's a workshop on African drum. Nothing in my college years. So,
well, you remember why I was inspired to do that, don't you? To teach at your school.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, go ahead and say this. Tell the story.
Yeah. So I didn't know Eileen at all, but when I got ready to leave Japan, this little town that taught me Taiko in the first place invited me to a concert with their handicapped kids, because the whole town they adopted handicapped kids, and I mean, it was just their thing. They were amazing, and so of course I went because I loved everything about this little town.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just awed these little boys played taiko. And I don't know whether they played it perfectly or not. I couldn't have cared less. What I'm seeing is the joy on their faces. And given the, the things that they had to overcome every day of their lives, it just, I thought, I gotta do that, to somebody. I mean, I didn't know who or what or why, or I knew why, just not the other parts. So that inspired me. And there were only two schools for the deaf in Arizona.
Yeah, Tucson and Phoenix.
And I couldn't drive to Tucson all the time. So I went to your school.
Mm-hmm.
And she was not very excited about having me, but.
Me?
Yeah.
You had
she
to
had her hands full.
I did have my hands full, but I do remember we had some visiting actors from Washington D.C. and they were going to be doing a play. They're doing a little tour and they were doing a play at the school, and so we were having a little get together at Patrick and Maya's house. And like, well, I said, you would come over, bring a couple drums, because we're all gonna entertain each other. And so I think you brought your big hiro, and your Asano Chu, and set it up in kind of like the carport backyard that we had. And you hit that first beat, and everyone in the audience, half of whom were deaf, we did this all at once, and the birds up in the tree went, and I basically said, oh my God, this has to happen.
That was the first time
I'd ever heard, because this is before YouTube. There was no way to like research Taiko.
Mm-hmm.
This was in 92, 93. And so literally the first time you hit that drum was the first time I'd heard a taiko. Was you in my backyard going, and all of us jumping out of our seats.
See, I thought it was in your classroom. That was what I remembered. But
No, because I had you come to the house first, because I'm like, I need to see this. I'm not going to just like put this random person I'd never met before in my classroom to teach this art form I'd never heard of before. Yeah. So yeah, that was my first. Was you.
Wow.
Was hearing taiko. And then we, I chose the students that were going to participate in the after school program, and it was really such a great group of kids. I still remember them to this day. And we did Renshu and Edo Matsuri and Taiko Bayashi, and then they had their performance, and it was supposed to be 3 months because you were working on your master's degree. Yeah. And it was supposed to be 3 months, and you were there for a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And in the meantime, I went on maternity leave and didn't go back.
Right.
And you continued on. And
yeah, that was inspired by Nomura.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was so happy I did it too. And I really had no idea what to expect. And of course, I never could have taught those kids without your help. That would have been impossible.
Yeah. So. I mean, I think we were a really good team, because you would teach a line of the song, and I'd have to watch to see what you were doing, interpret what you were saying, and then just be able to turn around and teach it. If I had a smaller group of students and you had a group of students.
Yeah.
So for me, it was really quite wild that I had to see it, had to gather it in my brain, and then had to turn around and teach it all very quickly. It was a very intense way to be introduced to taiko. And
you had a better memory for things. See, it was harder.
I was young. That was before I had children. I had all my brains, right?
That's why you had to quit, because
I went on maternity leave, right? But it was like October of so my daughter was 6 months old, and I called you. I'm like, I need to do this. I miss it. I need to do this again. And just never quit. I mean, I went through another, baby and pregnancy and playing through
that one
all of it.
For.
And no, I took a month off. I gave myself a month, and then I wrote out Otoi Sumo. But then I came back, and and I remember when when the group was young, you said, I need help, because you were doing it all yourself.
Yes.
And, you know, I need someone to do this or this. So I'm like, well, I can make costumes. I can sew. So I started making the costumes.
know,
And
I
you're like,
still
I
have
need someone to
many
do
of
the
them.
book work. I'm like, I can do the book work. And all of a sudden I'm doing all this stuff. So,
Right.
I mean, when you were like,
I
okay, I'm
agree.
retiring.
Yeah.
Eileen, here you go. I'm like, okay, sure, why not? It was a very sneaky, long 25-year
Yes, it
process.
was. It was. It was great, though. Yeah.
So, if I haven't said it enough times, thank you.
You're quite welcome. I'm so proud of what you've created, for sure. And I'm always glad to be able to come here and see it again.
Mm-hmm. Always welcome.